anyone else with me on that? Do you understand what I mean when I say that ghost stories are cozy? So I went through Reddit and have compiled a few stories that are a little bit spooky, a little bit creepy, and I thought I'd share them with you. So, this is story number 1. In 2013, my wife and I divorced, and we both moved into separate homes. The divorce went well, and we are still good friends to this day, partly because we have a daughter together. We agreed to split custody over our daughter, and I rented an old house in a historic district in the city where we live. It was a very pretty home, built in 1935 but kept up very well. I would have my daughter for 2 weeks at a time, and she had a bedroom in the back of the house. She was 3 years old at the time, and I kept noticing her talking to her imaginary friend. One day, I found her in a little closet, talking to another little imaginary friend girl named Betty. I have no idea where she heard the name Betty, as she was only 3, but I just chalked it all up to a child's vivid imagination. Keep in mind, I'm a single dad to a little girl. I really have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to dressing, hair, or just little girl stuff in general. Her mother is good at that stuff, but not me. I put my daughter to bed one night after her bath. I remember brushing her hair that night, but that was all I did. The next morning, her mum came to pick her up from my house, and my daughter was just waking up. Her mum went back to her bedroom to find my daughter's hair was fixed into perfect French braids. Her mum was really proud of me at first, that I'd done her hair so cute, but I told her I didn't and couldn't do that. I can't even braid hair, much less do perfect French braids. We asked our daughter how her hair got fixed like that, and she told us that Betty had done it during the night. I broke the contract on the rental agreement and moved out within the next month. Pretty creepy. Story number 2 is a bit of a longer one, and it goes like this. Hoath is a little village near Canterbury and Surrey, out on the old marshes that were once the Wonsum Channel. A few years ago, in 2014, my landscaping company were called to a job in a beautiful house there. The house was a converted barn and had been bought by the new owners, who wanted some work to be done there before moving in, as is often the case. So the first step was to visit the property and take a look to come up with a price for the job. There was a great deal of land surrounding the property, with extensive gardens that had fallen into a state of disrepair. After visiting the property, I returned saying that the place gave me the creeps, and that although it was empty and isolated, several hundred yards received a phone call from a distant voice that couldn't be understood from a number 000000. He showed us the call record to prove it on his mobile phone. Interested but not entirely convinced, we got on with our work. Joe told us that the back courtyard garden gave him the willies, but apart from that, day one was uneventful. On day two, it was quiet in the morning. Then in the afternoon, I went inside for a coffee. While I was there, there was knocking sounds coming from one of the back rooms. Nobody was in there, but it could well have been someone in one of the garden areas knocking against the wooden walls from outside while doing some job or another. But then there was a sound like wallpaper being unrolled or a poster falling off a wall, something like that. It came from the hallway. Then out of the hall, a shadow shot through the kitchen and out of the front door. I was alone in the house at the time, and after looking at every angle, the only way the shadow could have been cast was by the kitchen lights in the middle of the room. But there was nothing to cast it. I was starting to become a believer. On day 3, Paul, one of the builders, was having an argument with somebody on the phone. When he hung up, he said, "I can't believe that. The driver from the skip company says he won't come here to pick up the skip unless we can promise there's someone on site to meet him, because he reckons he saw something here when he dropped the skip off before we got here, and it's definitely haunted." When he did arrive, he said that when he dropped the skip off the first time, he knew the place was empty, but he saw someone moving around in there. And while he was unloading the skip, the radio in his lorry came on loud with a load of static. Day 4 was quiet, apart from the knocking and banging, which we'd all got used to by then, even though it was louder than before, and definitely not one of us messing about. On day 5, a guy turned up to put in a new TV aerial, and that involved some wiring being fitted in the back room where most of the noises were coming from. A few hours in, he was having a coffee with everyone else in the kitchen, and he said that he'd be glad when he was done because that room was creeping him out. He said that he was sure he kept hearing someone walking in there, but there was nobody inside the house, let alone in that room. The final thing that happened while we were working there was that another contractor turned up to do some light fittings and parked outside the house. While he was in there, his van radio came on really loud with a lot of static, just like the skip driver had said happened when he was there before. A few weeks after we'd been there, the new owners had moved in, and John and I went over to visit them and settle up the bill one evening after work. John was curious and asked the owner if he was enjoying living there. He obviously read between the lines a bit. Maybe he'd already been asked about the place by one of the other contractors, and he responded by saying, "It's a beautiful house, but I must say, it takes on a completely different feeling at night. It's not such a nice place after it gets dark." We returned to work there a couple more times on smaller jobs, but as the clients were living there full time by then, we didn't spend much time in the actual house itself. But on one occasion, we were in the kitchen in the evening having a cup of tea with the owner, when from the back room there was a huge tearing anything apart. I initially ignored it and it subsided. After about an hour, it started up again with more violence. It sounded like someone had moved my entire wardrobe across the bedroom floor. I ran up the staircase, but by the time I got to the second landing, the sound stopped. I barged into my room and it was completely silent, and no furniture had been moved. The second event was a lot more terrifying. It was about 3 a.m. I woke up to the sound of grown men arguing outside my bedroom door. The catch: the only male that lived with us was my 14-year-old brother. I jumped out of my bed and flung the door open to catch it, but there was nothing. I got back in bed after I stupidly locked the door thinking it would stop anything, and it started again. This time I went to my grandmother's and brother's separate rooms. They were both asleep and all TVs were off. The toilet down the hall flushed itself and I ran back to my room. The third event is when we decided to move. My brother was taking a shower upstairs, and while he showered, a clear, perfect imprint of another set of feet appeared in front of him. Okay guys, full disclosure, I had to stop filming because my neighbour came home and started playing music really loud, but it appears to have stopped. So yeah, story number 4. I had lived in this apartment for a total of 3 years. For the first year and a half, I lived there with my ex-husband. My best friend found the apartment for me. Her sister was breaking her lease and was looking for someone to take it over. I was desperate to move out of my husband's mum's house and for us to finally have our own place, and so we decided to take the lease. We divorced about a year and a half after having moved in. While my ex lived there, nothing much happened, except for one thing neither of us could explain. For context, the layout of the apartment was as follows. It was on the second floor, and as soon as you walked into the apartment, on your right was the kitchen, which was open to the living room. As you walked past the living room, you entered a long hallway which was about 20 feet long. On the left wall of this hallway, there were 3 doors, 2 leading to 2 bedrooms, and the last door on the left was the bathroom. At the very end of the hallway was a final door that led to the laundry room. My ex had a gaming computer situated in the living room, and I used the spare room as an art studio, and I had my own smell of stale old cigarettes that would come and go randomly. Normally I'd smell it in the laundry room, but sometimes I'd smell it as soon as you walk in the door or in the hallway. I could never explain where the smell was coming from. The hallway in the apartment always felt incredibly creepy. My friend told me that every time she came over while her sister lived there, the hallway had given her the creeps too. But her sister had lived there for 10 years and swears she never experienced anything there. About 6 months after the divorce, I started dating my current boyfriend. Sometimes he would spend a couple of nights over at the apartment with me because, quite frankly, I really didn't like being there alone, and he didn't like the idea of me being there alone either. Things had been happening that honestly had me wondering if someone was secretly living in my apartment. I lived in a really bad area, and there were a lot of homeless people around, so maybe one had snuck in. I didn't really have any other explanation. I'd hear things rattling around in the kitchen at night whilst laying in bed. The most terrifying thing that happened was whilst I was in bed alone. I have a Great Dane and she sleeps on her own futon bed, which is at the foot of my bed. She's super laid back, and when she's asleep, she's out. Nothing's waking her up, especially in the middle of the night when we're both asleep. Well, on this specific night, I woke up to her growling at something. She never does this, just randomly in the middle of the night. It was about 2 a.m. She was looking directly into the hallway, and she was super alert, sitting up and baring her teeth. I've literally never seen her do that before, so that alone scared me. I shushed her so I could try to listen, and when she was quiet, I heard the creaking and shuffling of footsteps coming down the hallway from the living room towards my door. I was absolutely shaken with fear. I fully believed that someone was in my apartment. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I was so terrified. I slowly climbed out of bed and grabbed my pistol, which was under my bed. I listened a little more and heard the footsteps proceeding closer, and my dog continued growling. I walked towards my door, which was open, and I hate to say that I fully expected to see someone in my hallway. The person that I suspected had been living in my apartment secretly for months, but as I turned around the doorway, there was absolutely nothing. I was relieved for a minute, but then it hit me to check the rest of my apartment. After finding nothing, I made sure all my windows and front door was locked, which they already were. I think it goes without saying I had quite a lot of trouble sleeping for the rest of the night. My boyfriend didn't experience near as much as I did, but he believes me, and he's had some experiences of his own. Randomly waking up in the middle of the night in absolute panic for no reason, with the feeling of dread, like something is in the room with you. It all came full circle when one night I heard what sounded like the silverware drawer opening suddenly, and then slamming shut whilst I was in bed with my boyfriend. And I didn't even get up to check what it was at this point. I was just trying to ignore everything. However, that morning I was going down to the first floor to get my mail. I lived above a restaurant and I was friendly with the owner, but we never really spoke that much. I happened to run into him and we started small talk, and I told him that I was moving. He said, "Wow, wasn't just all in my head. The last thing I remember experiencing was one night when my boyfriend and I were getting ready for bed. I was already in bed and he was brushing his teeth in the bathroom down the hall. My dog was coming into the bedroom to get onto her bed and I said goodnight to her. My boyfriend came into the bedroom and asked, "Who were you talking to?" I told him I'd just said goodnight to the dog. He said he was asking because he thought I was on the phone because he heard goodnight said out loud twice. I told him I only said it once. Thankfully, I moved out shortly after. Story number 5. Like most kids, I had an imaginary friend growing up. In fact, I had several, but the first one I can kind of remember was a little girl called Sophie. She was a normal girl, roughly my age, between 4 and 6, and she wore a dress and socks. However, Sophie had a very strange feature, an odd crick in her neck. My first house where I lived was an old one, I'd say roughly 80 years old, and I've grown up calling my next door neighbour Grandma, who has been in her place for the past 60 years. This is important later. Sophie was my best friend when I was little, which isn't out of the ordinary for kids. I taught her a lot and we would play in my room, but she would never go downstairs. She told me she was scared of them. It became routine for me to walk down the stairs, turn around and call up, "Hey, see, it's okay, you can come down." She wouldn't, and I could never understand why. The older I got, the less I saw Sophie, and eventually I forgot about her. That was until Mum and I visited Grandma after moving house, and we were reminiscing about my childhood there. That's when Mum brought up what had become my staircase routine when I was little, which led Grandma to question, "Who are you talking to?" I replied, "Sophie," and proceeded to describe her. Grandma went quiet. "You know, when I first moved into this house," she said, "my neighbours were in the process of moving out. They had a daughter who tripped and fell down the stairs around a month prior, and sadly she didn't survive the fall. She broke her neck." as we were all about to leave, a small voice came through which sounded like a child, saying, "You can come back downstairs if you want." We all looked at each other completely stunned, but no one said a word. Again the voice came through, repeating what it said before, and then said, "I am dead. I am dead. I am dead." We all grabbed our stuff and left. There was no way I was staying there any longer. I've told a few people about this, and most of them have said that it was a prank or someone on another channel tapping into ours, but the walkie-talkie was off. It was terrifying at the time, and to be honest, I believe it was something supernatural. Customers and other workers have reported strange things from that place, and a few have said to have seen a small boy in the back room and an old man who sits at the bar. Story number 7. This happened to my dad's best friend R in his youth. R had a school holiday job working as a co-conductor on a freight train. This entailed sitting up front with the train driver through the night and basically just keeping him awake. One morning in the early hours, R and the train driver were sitting talking as usual as their train travelled through a heavy thunderstorm through a rural part of the country. They saw a pale man standing on the tracks ahead of them, with long dark hair that was plastered against his body from the downpour. The train was headed straight for him, and they could do nothing to avoid him. Now, R says he had occasionally been on trains that had hit stray farm animals and such, and he knew the feeling of a thud from the impact that it would cause. The train sped towards this man, and R braced himself, but they felt no impact, even though they knew they had hit the man. Along the train tracks, there were concrete pillars with numbers on them to help the drivers identify their location as they travelled. The train driver made a highly unorthodox, unplanned stop as soon as they passed the next station, and told R to run in and report the man they had hit to the person in the office. R ran in and told the lady sitting there what had happened, and the number of the nearest pillar to where the accident took place. With a very concerned look in her eyes, she simply told him, "You are the third train tonight to make an emergency stop and report the same incident." Creepy. Story number 8. This takes place in my apartment in Hawaii. The apartment only had 2 elevators, and I only ever seemed to be able to catch one of them, which was the elevator on the furthest right, which incidentally was the elevator closest to the hallway that my apartment was down. Good for cutting time, but bad for other reasons. This elevator, without fail, constantly stopped on the 19th floor. I could be the only person in the elevator, and it would stop and open on the 19th floor. I could be going up or down, but it would still stop on the 19th floor. No one would be seen on that floor either, down the halls or anything. I checked because I was pretty sure someone was fucking with me. No doors slammed in a hurry, no noise, just the usual silence. And even when there was an elevator full of people, whether I knew them or not, we'd stop on the 19th floor. One day, I'm taking the elevator up after getting home from school, and lo and behold, it stops on the 19th floor. The doors open, but there's no one there. I sit around listening to my CD player, waiting for the doors to close and carry on my merry way. I slowly shuffled back to the elevator, pressed the button to go up, and the elevator crawled down from the 22nd floor, opened and ready and empty. I'm shaken and I press 22, just wanting to go home. I feel the familiar lift as it crawls up, seeing the numbers slowly rise to 22. I'm going home, fuck this elevator, I just want to go home and sleep. It stops on 22 and it stays there. The doors don't open, but the numbers become unlit as though it were in disuse. I try to push the door open button, but nothing is happening. Then the whole metal death trap shudders, heaves, and I feel like I'm starting to fall. I think for the briefest of moments, oh shit, I'm gonna die in a freak elevator accident. I swear it feels like I dropped 5 floors. 5 floors of free fall. I barely have time to catch myself when it feels like sudden brakes kick into gear and catches the cables, causing the whole car to shudder again, but there's no screech of metal. Just the walls shaking and me falling into a corner, limbs spread out to prevent injury. And as though nothing had happened, the elevator begins its slow crawl up again back to 22. Shaken, when the doors open, I rush out. The doors close behind me and once again I'm on the 19th floor. Needless to say, I climbed the staircase for the last 3 floors for about a week after that. And the final story. A few months back, I went on holiday with a couple of friends to celebrate my hen do. I ended up sharing a hotel room with my maid of honour. We spent the first couple of nights exploring the town and drinking a little too much, so that by the time we got back to the hotel, we fell asleep pretty much as soon as we crawled into bed. The third night rolled around and we all felt pretty rough, so we decided to take it easy. We had a nice meal but no booze and watched comedy stuff on her tablet until it was time for bed. I woke up abruptly at 2 AM with the feeling that something else was in the room with us. Telling myself not to be stupid, I opened my eyes and stared directly at a woman standing next to the bathroom door. The first thing I noticed about her was her hair, which was black, and then her shirt, which was green with white polka dots. But the more I looked, the more I realised that she was all wrong. She was unnaturally tall, so much so that her head was level with the door frame. The worst thing was her face though. The only way I can describe it is to say that it looked melted, but that doesn't even do it justice. Her teeth were huge, protruding way out of her mouth. She was leaning towards me, beckoning me over to her and laughing. I couldn't hear the laugh, but I could feel it. Now, I'm gonna pause here and say that I know what sleep paralysis is like. It's happened to me on and off since I was a very little kid. I wake up and can't move. I see stuff that shouldn't be there. This was not that. Firstly, I could move, because initially I thought it was a weird dream remnant. So I actually leaned towards her, trying to see better. Secondly, when I do wake up seeing weird things, they disappear as soon as I close and reopen my eyes. So I closed my eyes and opened them again, closed them and opened them, closed them and opened them, and every time she was still there. At this point I lost it. I closed my eyes and screamed for my maid of honour to turn the light on. As soon as she flipped the switch, I turned to check and the woman was gone. I got out of bed and searched the bathroom just to be on the safe side, and it was empty. I've never physically shaken from fear before, but by this point I was trembling from head to toe and couldn't stop. While I was pacing the room, my maid of honour was lying on her bed, awake but struggling to open her eyes. This was weird in itself because A, when she's up, she's up. I live in fear of sleeping in the same room as her because she's such a light sleeper and won't be able to nod off again if I wake her up. And B, she's a very protective friend, and under any other circumstances, if she heard me scream, she'd be at my side in a shot. Our conversation went something like this. Me, not wanting to sound stupid, I had a nightmare. Maid of honor. It's okay, sweetie, this hotel is just messed up. Me, I saw a woman. At this point, maid of honor sat bolt upright. Don't. Me, green polka dot shirt. We stared at each other for a moment, then without saying anything else, grabbed some essentials and left the hotel. We went down onto the beach and walked through the seawater, then managed to find a bar that was still open. When we were sat down with a pint each, we finally talked. When I had screamed in the hotel room, I'd woken my maid of honor up from a nightmare in which a really tall woman with a melted face and huge teeth was pinning her down onto the bed and screaming in her face. The woman had black hair and was wearing a green shirt with white polka dots. We didn't calm down until I booked us a room at another hotel. We waited out the rest of the night in bars and cafes, and when our other friend finally woke up, we got him to accompany us back to our room so we could get our stuff and go. So that's my story. I still have to sleep with the lights on because I'm so scared of what might be waiting for me if I wake up in the dark. So creepy that she was dreaming of the same woman that she saw. I don't know what to believe when I hear